next session is a discussion and panel with the Natural Resource Conservation Services, the South Dakota State University, the Nature Conservancy, Audubon, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, and South Dakota Game Fish and Parks. So we've got a ton of people that hopefully have a ton of great perspectives that will help alleviate or answer any questions that you all have. So if somebody from each of those organizations would come to the front and take a seat, that would be very appreciated. All right. I'm sorry for the pause on your question, John.
This is for the Pheasants Forever. Is there anybody down in the Gregory Tripp counties that is an advisor?
So our closest advisor there would be based out of the Kennebec office, and that position we just conducted interviews about a week or two ago, and that candidate has been selected, and they will be starting in May. So the candidate still has a few months of school left, and will be coming on at that point.
Thank you all. I guess primary nesting season got brought up briefly a couple of times, and Pete mentioned let's talk openly and transparently about policy. And I'm curious what natural resource agencies, NGOs, wildlife agencies, and NGOs as well, what steps they're willing to take to address the primary nesting season and some of the barriers that is creating for us as landowners, as managers, to really have the impacts that we want. It is a bigger problem. It's unfortunate it hasn't really been addressed yet. It has been a little brushed off. And I know there's been tremendous work from everybody sitting up here and recognizing that just through personal conversation and past experience. I was with Pheasants Forever and Game and Fish as well on the agency side, but it's just something we kind of beat around the bush a little bit of, and I understand why, but I feel like this is the perfect conference to have that discussion.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I guess I got the mic, so I'll start. But yeah, Pheasants Forever, we see and recognize those challenges and those hurdles when it comes to conservation programs. So we specifically have a few staff in Washington, D.C. that do work on policy. So we do have staff that are having those conversations and are trying to get that tide rolling a little more and get that change brought about. But yeah, it's definitely a long process, but we do see and recognize it, and we're trying to make some positive impact moving forward.
Yeah, thanks for that. Bruce Toy with Ducks Unlimited. Similarly, we have staff on the Hill trying to influence the decision makers on these types of policies. Prescribed fire and nesting season, short-term detriment, perhaps long-term gain for all those upland nesting species, and sometimes it's just hard to get past that perception that any management during that season is bad, and we all know that's not. So we will continue to push that message as well and try to make for some sensible policy in grass management in this part of the world.
I'm not on the panel, but there's a history of this that I think it's. So Ben, thank you for the question. I think it was Lardy that asked that, right? Let's just set the stage right, because Lardy, it's a loaded question. So where does it come into a play? On prescribed fire, on private lands, and specifically it comes into play on FSA program land, specifically CRP. That's number one. That's where the primary nesting season dictates that you must burn prior to the May 1 date or before April 30th. It kind of comes into play on fish and wildlife land in the sense that, so make sure I get this right, Laura, in the sense that if you've got easements, there is a permission system for be able to burn your easement land. Okay, that's number two that it comes into play. Beyond that, does the primary nesting season actually dictate burn dates on any other property or program where it's mandated? And I think the answer is no, but EQIP is clear of it. Grassland CRP is under the primary nesting season date regulations because it's a FSA program. But as far as NRCS specific programs, you've got freedom to burn for the most part. Doesn't mean you don't go into the office and talk it over, right? Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit because Ben's question is really important. About a dozen years ago, through our collective partnership, we actually put a real push on getting this changed. Now, I want to be careful about how we talk about this. Changing the primary nesting season is not the goal. Changing that date, the birds don't change. I mean, there may be a couple days here and there, but the primary nesting season date is well thought through and is significant and is reasonable and shouldn't be changed. The real question is can we decouple the fire practice as a tool from the primary nesting season so that there's more freedom to apply the tool within the primary nesting season, not changing the date. So several of us authored a proposal including with and through South Dakota Farm Service Agency, South Dakota NRCS, and 30 other partner organizations, all of which are represented here, plus a bunch more. And we had letters of support across this entire state. I think it's the first conservation question that I was ever a part of where it was unanimous. Everybody got it. The bird people got it. The turkey people got it. The elk foundation, everybody got it. And we floated that up through the system. We had signatures of NRCS, like I said, FSA, and others. Everybody got it, including the CRP people in South Dakota. We floated that to national. And National FSA said it was kind of a catch-22. Thank you, but no thank you. You can't change the primary nesting date without an EA. And it said the science that we were using to support it wasn't sufficient. And then they said it's not going to work anyway because the primary nesting season date gets in the way. It was like this circular argument. It was crazy. But what we learned through that process is that at that time, Farm Service Agency was saying an environmental assessment was necessary to revisit the primary nesting season date. And we were trying to make sure that they understood. We're not asking to change the primary nesting season date. That would require an EIS, environmental impact statement, and an environmental assessment. We were saying our state technical committee structure in South Dakota, if you're familiar with this, I've reviewed this and I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer. I think we have the power in South Dakota to not only, if we want to change the primary nesting season date, which is going to take some real testable fortitude, we don't have to do that. I think we have the power to decouple this tool from it and have a little bit more freedom through the state technical committee. That's all background information to the primary question that Ben is asking is, are we going to do something about it? And I just wanted to share that because there's been a lot of talk over a decade on this issue. And Ben, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but what you're really getting at is objective-based burning that's timed correctly and is safe. And we know that prescribed burning in April can be poor timing for objectives, and it can be very unsafe depending on the fuel load. So I thought I'd better clarify.
I have a question. I'm not really understanding how federal budgeting happens, but all of this money has been allocated for these programs that you've talked about. With the change of administration happening in January, is there any chance of that money being clawed back from these programs?
So with all of the funds that we have obligated now, we've committed to these projects, and the funds that we have obligated at this time will not be impacted. We've got, I expect that our allocation that we've received for 25 is secure. Beyond that, that could be impacted. The funds that we would be allocated for use for conservation within the state. But everything that we've got committed to projects at this point are secure. Does that answer your question?
So the $24 million that Pheasants Forever, the $24 million that Pheasant Forever RCPP or whatever it is, that's secure?
Yes. So that was a fiscal 2024 commitment the project was selected. We're just going through the final negotiation pieces for that project, and that's that I feel is secure.
On burning of the prairies, with taking into consideration the nesting, does a late April burn, does that impact the cover for the nesting birds adequate enough for them to survive and not be having predators coming in on them?
Yeah, so, I mean, especially you think like April, probably, I mean, most of your songbirds haven't gone out there by then, but I think things like, sharp-tailed grouse and those that are kind of coming in earlier, and obviously a fire going through those areas, that's not beneficial to those individuals. Generally, the adults, they're going to escape no problem and go find another place to nest. Probably where you'd run into more things would be you kind of get into your, June time period, that kind of thing, but, again, fire is a very natural event. These animals are birds, specifically, are really adapted to. They will move. They may lose their nests, but they are generally pretty prolific re-nesters. But the other thing to think about is that cover that comes up later in the summer. You've got a lot more forbs. You've got a lot more bare ground. You've got a lot more of those grass seed heads. They're carrying a lot more seed. So there's, it makes tremendous brooding cover. So it's not necessarily that cover is lost. It may be just be instead of nesting cover, it's used for other purposes.
Real quick, before we take another question, some of you have given presentations already today, and they were wonderful, but some of you have not. And so I worry that not everybody knows who is associated with what. So if you've not given a presentation, would you mind giving a quick introduction of like who you are, what you do, that sort of thing?
My name's Laurel Badura. I work for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, Bruce Toy, the manager of conservation programs for Ducks Unlimited here in South Dakota.
Joe Blastic with the Nature Conservancy. And I would add to your question, when you're talking about burning, not to jump on Owen here, but to answer your question here, when you're talking about burning areas, we're not talking about burning all of them most of the time. So there's always residual cover nearby. So if you have 80 acres, easy math, you're not doing all 80 acres, you're doing 20, 40, 30. So you still have residual habitat for your nesting birds.
Owen McElroy with Game Fish and Parks, based out of Region 4, which is northeast South Dakota. Mainly public land, but I could try my best to answer any private land questions too.
So just had one quick question for NRCS, Pheasants Forever, because it's come up in my area a couple different times. So say a landowner or a rancher has, either all or a portion of his ranch in a grassland CRP contract. Are they still able to maybe pursue some of the new Pheasants Forever assistance programs that might be coming, whether it's, I know Game Fish and Parks also has some possible assistance programs coming down the road too, but I'm just wondering on conflicts there between different agencies and cost share programs.
All right. I'm going to maybe take the first approach to this. Currently, if lands are enrolled in grassland CRP, they're ineligible for EQIP, CSP, and RCPP. So, that's been an identified barrier to some conservation opportunities. I know that the leadership within both agencies are aware of it, and but at this point in time, they would be ineligible for EQIP, RCPP, or CSP. I'm not sure on, if there were state programs that were eligible to service those areas. That may not be a conflict with what they can provide, but for CSP, EQIP, and RCPP, it's ineligible.
Yeah, so we would fall right in line with NRCS. So you can't necessarily stack payments or stack program and payments on the same acres. There would be some other potential opportunities like public access or things like that. But as far as other conservation programs, we would fall right in line with NRCS.
Manpower and equipment are a couple of pretty big factors around getting a burn done. Any of you folks have burn trailers, or are there burn trailers available in South Dakota for people who want to do some burning?
So that's one of the things that we're working on building through our RCPP is that, with our cooperative agreement. Sorry, I mix them up. We are going to be, for our staff, we're going to be building some of those trailers with the necessary equipment for that. Some other states within Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever have used chapter funding to help try and get some trailers, even like on loan for landowners. So that's something we've discussed. We just have not established yet here in South Dakota.
I guess I briefly mentioned earlier, we do have a few drip torches, pump cans, radios, flappers, a few things like that for folks that are looking to do a fire and just need a little extra equipment.
So you can do some creative grant writing and accounting to do some
Money laundering.
kind of money laundering. So SDSU partnered with Mid-Missouri, and we wrote the Conservation Collaboration Grant Agreement. And what we did was build capacity for Mid-Missouri River by having them burn acres, and we paid them to burn acres. And then they were to be able to use those funds for, acquiring capital assets and those kind of things. So there was a good that was being transferred, that they were getting those acres burned. So that's how we were able to do that. And I think it was about 120,000 that went that way.
I'm going to add just one quick innovative thing that we found through the Grassland Coalition with our wonderful partnership with NRCS. So these grants don't allow you to buy equipment. They do allow you to enter into contracts. And I'm going to just share this because it really worked well. So we got a large grant from NIFWIF to work on this restoration project, which also supports some of the fire that we're doing at this cooperative project on the east side of the state. What we did there is now you have to have a little bit of cash in the bank to be able to kind of get started on this, but we had the Grassland Coalition purchase the mower, and then we had the Grassland Coalition rent the mower to the project, and they were able to pay that rental bill with the contract money from the grant. So essentially they bought a piece of equipment and rented it back from themselves. And at the end of the day, at the end of the 4-year contract, they essentially paid off that piece of equipment without expending much of any of their own capital funds. So really innovative ways of thinking about how we can leverage above board all of these opportunities that all these agencies are really providing us. So I just wanted to add that in. So I still have a question. Okay, I'm gonna ask my question. I got two actually, so I'm gonna ask the first one and then we'll break and see if there's anybody else that wants to add on. And Craig Larson is with us from North Dakota. He's really good at numbers. So Craig, check my numbers on this. But we have tens of millions of dollars that have been basically put on the table here. And then when I add it up, it's something like north of $2 billion, right, Craig? It's a lot. It's a lot of money on the table. What is the consequences, of doing all of the prep work, investing all this money? What are the consequences to NRCS or Pheasants Forever or any of these other programs if we actually don't get the burns done? We often get wrapped around the axle of what success looks like: training and prep and planning and on-site prep and fire breaks. But what if we actually don't get the burns done? What are the consequences to the landowner or to the programs if in 5 years from now we don't have acres that actually got burned? Can anybody address that?
Well, I guess I'll take a stab at it, but we can look at our neighbors to the south in Nebraska and see how that woody encroachment has just continued to march up the Great Plains. So I guess the biggest and kind of very simplest thing is we'll be 5 years behind. you know, and everybody keeps saying, oh, we don't have an issue, only see a few trees. Well, as many in the room know, if you see a couple trees, there's hundreds, if not thousands more in the seed bank and coming up. So we need to be proactive on this. And again, we're on the leading edge of that green glacier encroaching on the Great Plains. So we got a chance to, I'll say, slow it and hopefully maybe even stop it from continuing to march north.
I'll chime in because I'm actually from Nebraska. I'm representing the South Dakota Partners program today, but the consequence to the landowner is I have 3 projects right now that are between 700 and 800 acres apiece, and those landowners can graze about 15 head every year for season long, and the minimum cost for a tree removal project for those particular landowners is $500,000. And so when we have landowners that want to keep 1 tree, 2 trees, or a shelter belt, just keep in mind that the consequence to not burning over the years is those trees sneak up on you. We're all very, very busy as landowners, so we have things to do. And the minute we skip a prescribed burn or we skip tree removal, going out and cutting trees, the problem quickly adds up and you're far behind, and pretty soon, after 3 or 4 years, those trees are 10, 15 feet tall, and you can no longer clear them out through prescribed fire. So just keep in mind that if you have a project where you've used partner money to do tree removal and then you don't follow up with your end of the deal, the agencies are less likely to come in and do tree removal a second time around.
I can address it from an individual producer contract perspective. So if we have prescribed fire in our producer contracts, we can't do prescribed fire. We then look at other alternatives. So we could address some of the issue through brush management, but that's going out and cutting the trees down and putting them in a pile and then disposing of the pile. That process is very labor intensive and time consuming. So what I see is a huge opportunity cost to landowners that have woody encroachment. By not being able to burn, you have to look at alternatives such as brush management and do it all via mechanical means. So from a financial assistance standpoint, that is what we would do with your contracts, is ask you to consider addressing the resource concern from a mechanical means instead of the fire. And if you can't use the funds, so then we look at what our other contract alternatives are. If we were to cancel, the funds are gone. The opportunity that we had to make the difference is gone. So it is really important to continue supporting the practices that best service your needs.
I guess I'll add one more comment that everybody's kind of alluding on, but maybe haven't said in such direct words. But as the woody encroachment intensifies and that level increases, so does the cost per acre for the treatment. So prescribed burning is by far the cheapest, most effective, and best way to tackle woody encroachment.
Hey, Matt, can I follow up on a question from that? Hi, Pete. I'm back here. I see you're looking. This was a question I was going to ask anyway. With your RCPP that you've got coming, are you going to have funding in there to pay for deferment to build fuel in order to handle the trees? I know that's a pretty big concern when you talk about prescribed fire, is how do you build the fuel? How do I find a way to feed my cattle in the meantime? And then you did mention that you also have funds to do the prescribed fire itself at equipped cost share rates. So maybe you want to talk about that a bit.
Yeah, so that will be part of the prescribed grazing. And again, we're still working through exactly what that looks like. But yeah, we do intend to have deferred grazing as part of our prescribed grazing payments. And as far as As far as the second part of the question, yeah, when it comes time to actually implementing the prescribed burning, we're going to fall in line with those EQIP cost share rates. So again, depending on complexity, densities, and things like that, we'll work through that as we're continuing to develop the agreement. Did I address everything?
Yeah, I was just going to do a follow-up question. Do you plan to have restrictions on who can do the fire in terms of qualifications, or, can a landowner do it themselves? Does it need to be a prescribed burn association? What sort of restrictions are you looking at? And Kara asked me to have you spell out what EQIP stands for.
Yes, sorry to everyone in the room for talking in acronyms. Unfortunately, that is the common nomenclature in conservation programs. So EQIP is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. So sorry about that. Yeah, but as far as exactly what those parameters look like, we're going to continue to build that out in our negotiations with the agreement. So very good considerations, though. Thanks for the input.
I was just going to add on one thing with prescribed fire. I know it's a very common thing to talk about just spring burning, but if you have other problems such as invasives, you might consider fall burning or even winter burning as a tool to get rid of those. You can still maintain some part of your grazing operation by using grasslands, as long as you don't graze too heavy, but that's just something else to think about.
So part of our prescribed burning conservation practice standard is developing the burn plan. That's the main part of that practice. So anything that we do needs, like any program dollars spent has to have a burn plan, and it has to meet our standards. So that should kind of help answer that question of Josh's, is it at least needs to have a burn plan. And if the producer doesn't feel comfortable, they can hire somebody. Like that goes for all of our programs.
Okay, I started this, and I still didn't get an answer, and maybe I didn't ask my question clearly enough. I think the room gets the ecology, so thank you all for addressing the ecology of the landscape, but I think we get that. My specific question was, I'll try to restate it more clearly. The millions of dollars that are going to go in and invested into the preparation for burning, and Val, you did address this to some degree, we're dealing with on-the-ground fuels reduction, fire line prep, deferments, tanks, pipelines, all these things that we are hinging on fire. My question is not the ecological consequences of not getting the burn done. I want to know more, if we know anything about, or any speculation on programmatic consequences to not actually following through on these fires. Will we see another RCPP grant? If in 5 years we have 100 acres, 1,000 acres that are actually burned under all of this effort, I think that's an epic fail. And I'm just being honest. That's just my assessment. I think that's an epic fail of where we could or should go. And I'm wondering if that is the consequences, or if that's where we end up. Will we see more money in the Northern Plains to combat all? And it's not just about cedars; it's about everything else too. But what do you think? I mean, and I think Sean's got some comments, and then. So anyway, that was a question. I'm sorry if it wasn't clear the first time.
Yeah, I'll just touch the bigger picture. I touched on landowner contracts before. There are things that are calculated into how South Dakota receives money. Everything has a formula because all 50 states want they pull from the same pot of funds. So there's criteria associated with how much, when headquarters figures out how much money South Dakota is going to get, they have a big formula that goes into it, and some of it is the implementation rate. So if we obligate a lot of funds towards fire efforts and that won't work, and our projects can't get implemented, it in turn negatively impacts the amount of money that South Dakota gets for their program dollars. And it's just a lot of lost opportunity.
Pete, I would also add that just as the individual, there are already examples, and some of them are in the room here, where they already have done the deferment, and they might have done it 2 or 3 times because maybe it was too wet and they didn't get to burn, or some other outside forces were not allowed them to burn. So then they have to incur the cost again of doing fire breaks and deferment and those kind of things. So they're eating that cost. If you just throw out a number like $35, $40 an AUM, it's very expensive to the landowner that the burn didn't get done. So to me, it's a couple things. It's what Valerie is alluding to, that and what you alluded to, if we're not successful, we're probably not going to get funds in the future. But it directly impacts that landowner. If they don't get the burn and they want to still burn, then they're eating more costs. And you're probably not going to give them another payment of deferment and those kind of things. And so, I think there was a lady that down in Herrick that had it for 3 years, had to defer.
No, I can touch on this just a little more locally. So the NRCS offices in our 4-county area, obviously we work hand in hand. The Mid-Missouri works hand in hand. We coordinate all the time with NRCS, and so we're even out there planning these burns together. And yeah, there's a million things have to come together just right to get these burns pulled off. And just from the local landowner perspective, if that burn doesn't get done, say it's scheduled for 2025, it doesn't get done, the NRCS offices have been very good to work with, where they can extend the contract, they can modify a contract, and usually buy you maybe another 2 or 3 years to get that burn done. Obviously, you're not going to get any more money than what was already originally in your, whether it's EQIP or whatever, contract, but there is flexibility in there. We've had to exercise it numerous times with the burns that we've done, where they're scheduled for a certain year, and sometimes weather conditions don't cooperate, other factors outside our control don't cooperate. So there's always that wiggle room in there, and NRCS has been great to work with in that respect.
Yep, and the final thing I'll add relative to the agreement that Pheasants Forever has with us, they'll be eligible to apply for a renewal. So if our CPP remains in future farm bills, they're going to be eligible to apply for a renewal. However, they're going to have a certain percent of the funds that they received spent. So, it's going to hamstring their ability to continue to support the project long term. So there's just a great opportunity that I'm hopeful that we can capitalize on, because if we don't, it's going to be very detrimental to what we could have done.
Yeah, and on the Pheasants Forever side of things, if we don't deliver those deliverables that we have built into these agreements, that will affect future funding. And again, that'll trickle down to the landowners that we're trying to work with. So we kind of put our name on the line, but also it really ultimately boils down to landowners too.
So if you've got, so you mentioned that the funding sources are not stackable, understood. But if I have a piece of property that isn't already under contract in some shape, way, or fashion, where would I start with this group? I mean, where would I get the most money? Where potentially would I get the quickest response, most support, those sorts of things? I mean, am I always going back to NRCS, or should I be starting with Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, federal government?
Yep, so the question was kind of where do landowners start? So again, working with your NRCS offices, the Pheasants Forever staff that I have in the room here, they're the ones that help work in these NRCS offices. So getting started there is your first thing. Getting your name on an application to try and pursue some funding, that's kind of one of the first steps. And then from there, like I tell my staff, they go out and they drive around your ranch with you and figure out what you want to do. I mean, there's 9 steps to the conservation planning process. They work through that, get your goals and objectives, and then from there, like what I try to tell landowners too is that a lot of folks will walk in the door saying, I want to get into this program, or I want to get into this program. Well, ultimately, you want to figure out what's best for you and your operation. And Developing a sound conservation plan is the first step, and then from there, figuring out what programs and what funding and what other opportunities out there kind of fall in line afterwards.
Thank you. We are out of time. Thank you, everybody that came up and participated on the panel. We do have a couple more question periods throughout the day, so we'll try to get more of the audience questions on the next one. We also have the note cards, so please be turning in the note cards. We've got a whole hour at the end to do those questions. So thank you, guys.
There's a box at the front table.